I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Do a few introductions here. My name's Chad Gilmore. I'm the Striper Club president. John Anderson, who's behind the camera back there, is the vice president. Tim Grimmett beside him is, we're gonna call you member at large. Can I make the joke about member at large? We're not gonna make that joke, no. No, we're not. Pat McClanagan is, raise your hand, Pat. Pat's our treasurer. Where's Joel? I saw Joel, or there's Joel. Joel's member at large. Candy, where's Candy? I saw her, there she is. Candy is our, what are you, Candy? Like secretary, web, all kinds of good stuff, right?
Yes, sir.
That's right, there you go. Tim Barr's not with us tonight. Who am I missing? Is that it, of the board? Tim Barr? Yeah, that's it. I'm not going to take a lot of time tonight because we've got Mike here, Mike Bednarski. But for those of you that it's your first meeting, I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about what the Striper Club is, what we're involved with. You folks that have been here before, you've heard this whole thing before. The Striper Club is heavily involved with DWR. Where's Dan? There's Dan right there. Yep, there he is. Raise your hand, Dan. Just real quick. Everybody knows you. And it's great that Gary's sitting beside him too. So the partnership between the Striper Club, Smith Mountain Striper Club, and DWR is a really deep relationship, and it's because of, first of all, it's because of Gary. Gary's our key coordinator for all of the initiatives that we're involved with DWR. But Gary, and I think he would probably echo this, he can't do what he does without the volunteer support from our total club, okay? So I'm gonna go through, and I did this at lunch today. So if the folks were at lunch today, you've heard this, and you've probably heard this very similar at the March meeting. But some of the initiatives that we've been involved with DWR started with the wintertime tagging. That was last year. We tagged some fish that were used as part of the summer mortality study between DWR and Coastal Carolina. So that we're talking about that summer mortality study, we had folks that were catching, tagging, and helping track during that summertime mortality study, okay? Coming up soon, they'll be doing the striped bass fingerling stocking. If you're interested in helping Gary do that and DWR do that, that's probably going to be about that first week or two of June. So get in touch with Gary, let him know your availability. It's really hard to plan it because the fish are ready when they're ready. And then Dan has to say, hey, Gary, they're ready, and hey, we got to jump tomorrow. So you got to kind of be ready to go with it. So usually those stockings, it's usually 4 or 5 different stockings. Does that sound about right? One thing about the stocking, years ago, and Mike got to see this in real time today. Years ago, the stocking truck used to just pull up at any access point that they could get, and the stripers were funneled or dumped into the lake in these shallow water areas. Well, guess what's shallow water? We got bass, bluegill, crappie, catfish, white perch, all of the predators, right? So the survival was okay, wasn't great. Dan started the pelagic stocking. It started, 20 or 25%, then 50%. Well, it's pretty much 100% pelagic stocking now. And that first year survival rate has increased because those fish have gotten away from the shoreline and away from the predators. So Mike was on the boat with me today. And any of you know, on the Bedford side, on the south side of the lake, there's a little pull-off, and people will fish there, and there's like it honestly looks like an old loading dock. It probably wasn't a loading dock, or maybe like a little wharf. That concrete pad has actually collapsed into the water now. Has anybody seen that? I saw it for the first time today, which was really weird. So hopefully nobody's car was on that, because people do pull down in there and kind of fish now. But that was one of the places when we first moved to the lake 9 years ago. I met Gafford. Mike, Mike Gafford. We met them there, and my son was with me, so I remember them stocking in that area. But anyway, that's the stocking program. If you're interested in helping Gary and DWR with that, please let Gary know. Another thing that we've got coming up, and this is something that we want the participation all year long, is the fish head program. Dan will work with Gary and his crew. They extract the otolith bone. The otolith bone is analyzed for the age. It's compared to the size of the fish to make sure these fish are growing. It's a clean job. You'll have a lot of fun, and you'll smell great when you're done. Okay, but it's very that piece is very important because it lets Dan and the rest of his staff know: are these fish growing the way that they're supposed to grow? Are they on that growth line? Are they better? Are they worse? And it helps Dan in his management of the fish, of the striped bass fishery. That will probably be, that's usually later in June. We usually do 2 processes, right? We do one in late June, early July, and then one at the end of the summer. Critically important. When you put a fish head in a Ziploc bag, or however you want to do it, we need each individual fish labeled. You can put a piece of paper in the bag. You can put the piece of paper, we have waterproof paper, put the paper in the fish's mouth. We need 2 pieces of information: the date it was caught and the length. And if you want to put your name and email address, that's great. Dan will send you more information than you thought was readily available for the fish, right? But it's critically important that each fish is labeled. Don't put 3 fish heads in a bag and say there's a 25-inch, a 23-inch, and a 28-inch, because you can't tell once they're in the bag. Sometimes you can, but that guesswork doesn't work in science, does it, Dan? Some people think it does. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. So the otolith bone thing and the fish head processing, that's a big thing that's coming up. In the fall and early winter, October, November, December, Dan does gill netting. One of the perks of the gill netting is usually not October because the fish spoil, but November, December, the water's cool enough, you'll go home with fish, probably a good amount of fish. But Dan sets the nets out. The next day they bring the nets in. The fish are basically analyzed, right? You're cutting the head off and all of that. The reason for that is they're wanting to see what that first year recruitment is. You know, fish that are stocked in June the following year. So those fish are a little over a year. How are those fish progressing through the system? All right. The other thing that we're doing, and I'm going to stand up here and beat the drum, we're still not doing our job as a club, folks. The angler diaries, we got to do better. We've done better, but we can still do better. We need more angler diaries. That helps Dan assess the catch rate. So all of these things, the first year survival rate, the recruitment, the angler catch rate, all of that goes into Dan's analysis of what that stocking number will be. And the volunteers and the volunteer hours that you guys are providing, it really helps DWR and helps us strengthen that relationship with DWR. Does anybody have any questions? Gary, did I leave anything out?
Locations on the freezers.
Oh yeah, locations are at Indian Point and Magnum.
Still there, John, right?
Yes.
And like I said, critically important that you label every fish individually, okay? Anything else on that stuff? Dan, you got a comment? Okay, you don't. Okay. Real quick, before I turn it over to Mike, is everybody struggling fishing right now? Okay, good to see a lot of heads nodding. Best guess, spawn, right? Spawn, Fisher Act. I was talking, Tommy and I were talking, the few stripers that I have seen lately, you present a bait to them, artificial, I'm telling you, I haven't bait fished. Present a bait to them on live scope, and they turn and run the other, swim the other way. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But stick with it, it's gonna get better. they've got love on their mind right now. Okay, when love is over, they're going to put the feed bags on, and that's a really cool time. So stick with it. Has anybody had like some really good striper success lately? Sean, any striper success lately?
I'm going after greenfish right now.
It's tough. It really is tough right now. It truly is. But stick with it. It's going to turn around very soon. Anything that anybody wants to talk about right now? One thing, I want to set the stage for, Mike's going to touch on a lot of topics tonight. A lot of topics. It's going to talk about probably some grass carp hydrilla, some DWR stuff. One thing I want to set the stage for right now, and he's talked about it in a podcast. What was that, Monday night that it dropped, or Tuesday? I can't remember. Earlier this
Tuesday
week.
morning, I think.
Okay.
Started blowing up.
I want to make this abundantly clear. The condition or the state that DWR is in right now, it has nothing to do with the current administration. It has nothing to do with the past administration. So if we can keep the politics out of it tonight, it's not a Democrat or a Republican thing. This is a systemic thing that's been probably brewing for a while. And Mike said something today on the boat or at lunch, I can't remember.
I'm very afraid now of what you're going to repeat.
No. He said that he is shocked that they've made it this far without cutting things. So that lets you know how far back this problem has gone. So if we could keep politics out of it, and if we could keep like the finger pointing and the accusations of you guys haven't done this. I mean, I'd love to stand up here and say, Dan, you've ruined our fishery. We know that's not true because we've got a great fishery. So if we can stay by those two rules tonight, I think it would be very productive. And this is kind of overreaching. Over the last 4 months, we've how can I say this? Over the last 4 months, we have taken on a pretty contentious issue with the grass carp and the hydrilla. And at times, it has been contentious. It's been there's been a little bit of friction, okay? I thought this week, Mike, Dan, and some of his folks had a meeting with TLAC. We had a big meeting today, a luncheon with TLAC. I think this week has really helped. It's been very effective and it's been very productive. I think a lot of folks are now on the same page. There's a fella sitting in this room tonight that probably a couple months ago I don't think probably would have been sitting in the same room. But it's the partnership between TLAC, SMLA, and the Striper Club. I want you guys to understand something, and I'll get off the stage and quit speaking. There was a comment made at lunch today. I had no idea the Striper Club was as big, and what was the other word? And as involved. That's you guys. You guys and ladies and gals and people. So take pride in what you're doing. We're making a difference in this lake. I never thought at 54 years old I'd want to get involved in any sort of political or government type of stuff. But there are a lot of folks in this room who've put a lot of effort into it. And the lake is going to be better off for it. I know it for sure. And I think there's a key word there, alignment. I think there's really good alignment between the local people, the DWR people, and we're going to make sure that the people in Richmond, and I'm not talking about DWR Richmond, I'm talking about our politicians, that they're in alignment with us, right? Because this lake drives a lot of revenue for the area, and it provides a lot of sporting opportunities for the constituents. So I'm super proud of what this club has done. I'm super excited for the future of this club and what our role will be going forward. So I appreciate everybody's efforts, because it's been outstanding to watch. It really has been, and I'm proud of everyone. It's been awesome. So I've chatted. Yeah, Sean.
Has the club or anybody spoken with the AEP just to get a feel for your water levels and what can be done, or is that just strictly because of the lack of rain and there's just really nothing that can be done? I didn't know if there was, like, I read something about Lake Gaston has some kind of special,
It's the FERC plan, right?
yeah, I didn't know if AEP had something like that, or if there was, I'm sure this is all probably a little weeks.
If the water level at Memorial Day is what it is now, we're going to have a beehive going on here. Because I think there are a lot of folks that have, they're seasonal people. They have no idea what's going on. And then they show up for Memorial Day and they can't get their boat in. Or, I don't know if anybody heard, did anybody hear that somebody ran aground Craddock or something? That was Tuesday night. I'm going to do it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't not do it. I'm sorry. I got to do it. So there is someone in this room who is a recent purchaser of a wakeboard boat. So he has vowed to swamp every one of us that he sees out fishing. I'm just kidding. But like, you think about it, like the water level. Is there anybody in here that has any sort of, I know we had one member who used to work for AEP. Is there anybody in the room right now who has any sort of affiliation with anybody, family or friends that work with AEP?
I'll send you a big check every month.
You're right.
John, you were sharing at lunch an event where AEP has started to kick in. Would you mind sharing that?
Sure. So I'm John Vidovich. I'm the president of the Smith Mountain Lake Association. Really appreciate the outreach. We had a gap on our board. We have a board of 23 folks. We had a gap we really didn't have. We had anglers, but no one really from the fishing community. Chad was kind enough to volunteer John to be on our board. We've had a lot of conversation with AEP about the water level. Lack of rain. I mean, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, came out and said 20 years, this is the worst drought that the state of Virginia has had. And we had a member who really thought that AEP was doing something and not telling anybody what was going on. So they wrote a letter to FERC, which is the Federal Regulatory Commission that gave AEP its license. And surprising enough, FERC responded. And they investigated what AEP was doing, and they were managing the lake under protocol of their license. For the first time in a long time, there's trigger events. And when the water is going to be low, and they're going to anticipate it's going to stay low, AEP is required to release less water downstream. That's what's happening now. So people call our office and say, the lake level is low. Who can we call? God. Yeah. If you know how to do a rain dance, please. I mean, it is a problem. People can't get their boats down those cables. It's just not long enough. But that's what we know what's happening. I mean, I don't think AEP is doing anything devious. I mean, it is their lake, and they allow us to enjoy it. But we did have FERC look into it, and they're managing it the way they should be managing it. So hopefully that answers the question.
And just to jump onto that a little bit more clarification. AEP has a license from FERC that he was talking about. It's the federal arm that regulates all hydropower facilities. And in order for AEP to operate, they have to have a license from FERC. And FERC requires them, as part of their license, and to operate and not be shut down, they have to meet certain guidelines, and one of which is to release so much water into the Stanton River way on downstream. And now we're at a point where they're mandated, they don't have an option. If they just decide we're going to fill Smith Mountain Lake back up, they can be just shut down permanently. So we're in a position where there's more water required to be released than what's coming in. And, you know, we're seeing the results of it right now. And it happened like this 20-some years ago. There was a drought like this, and we had a similar situation. And it's not going to last forever, but until it starts raining, it's not going to get any better. But AEP is required. They don't have an option about how much water they can fill the lake back up. It's not under their control. And like you said, they're doing what they're mandated So they're getting a bad rap for it, but they can't really control that part.
Any other questions? That was a great question. Thanks for your answer. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. I had a great day on the boat with Mike today. Took him up the Roanoke Arm. You know where this is going, right? There's no fish on the Roanoke Arm. Should have taken him up the Blackwater, right? But what I did get is Mike to approve. We're going to have 750,000 fish from here on out. He knows that this lake needs more stripers. So no, I'm just kidding. That's a joke for anybody online. That's a joke. But Mike has been great. Mike traveled this week, so this is great. He was in Blacksburg on Monday or Tuesday. Went back to Richmond. Came to Lynchburg Forest area on Wednesday. Went back home. He's here today, going back home. So we've got Mike here. He's put some miles on his car this week. He's put some miles. Oh, and he ran a half marathon yesterday, just as he said, for poops and giggles, right? So without any further ado, Mike Bednarski, DWR. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, did he mic you up?
Yeah, he did.
Okay, great.
I'm okay. I started running to burn off stress, and apparently I'm in half marathon shape after 3 years of doing that. So thank you for the introduction, Chad. First of all, let me get to the beginning of my talk here. I just want to say how much I appreciate the gracious hospitality I've received from this area over the past couple of days, and being invited to lunch, meeting with everybody, having the opportunity to work with some really great folks on some really complex issues has been incredibly rewarding and incredibly empowering. I really appreciate Chad's hospitality getting out there fishing, although I will point out that every time we stopped, it was, this is Gary's spot, this is Tommy's spot, this is John's spot. And I don't think he was gonna show me any of his spots. But I saw something, and I had asked, Chad had said, well, what do you wanna fish for? So I bass fish a lot. I just wanna give you a little bit about my background. I'm trained as a scientist. I wanted to be a professional bass fisherman. That's what drove me into this field. I got some really good advice in my early 20s that professional bass fishing is a good way to get divorced and max out credit cards. So I concentrated more on the scientific career, and that's what brings me here today. So as a bass fisherman, I've seen a lot of different things. So I told Chad, I said, why don't I see the striper side of things? You know, I grew up in New England. I did a lot of fishing for stripers when I was a kid. I was lucky enough to catch the peak of the New England striper fishery in the late 90s and early 2000s, and remember a lot of 40 and 50 fish days, and remember a 15 fish day being slow. So I wanted to see something different today. So as I got around Smith Mountain Lake, I saw something that I didn't even think possible. I saw a largemouth bass, a 5-pound, 4-ounce fish. I thought it was gonna weigh 410. I think Chad's scale's a little heavy, so if anybody has a fish you're concerned about hitting a certain weight, borrow his scale. But I saw this 5-pound largemouth come out of 85 feet of water off of a dock and grab a chartreuse super fluke. It just blew my mind because it really showcased what a unique and interesting resource Smith Mountain Lake was. And one of the things that was really apparent as we run around the lake is there's a lot of different options available to you to fish there, depending on what you want to do. You know, as Chad and I were talking about it, I said I'd be upriver trying to like churn up mud with my trolling motor looking for bass. And I could tell, even though he said he was frustrated by those bridge pilings and all the traffic, he secretly enjoyed the fact that he could catch fish in front of all of those people. So it was really great to get that experience and get out there. So I am lucky enough to work for the Department of Wildlife Resources and oversee the statewide freshwater fisheries program. It's a program that benefits the more than 500,000 anglers in Virginia. I've got a staff of about 85 people who are some of the best folks in the country. I love making Dan uncomfortable. I'm gonna do it sparingly, but I can't promise I won't do it more than 3 times or less. Got folks like Dan, I got folks across the state that truly are into this because they not only like fish, but they recognize that our role is to work for the people of Virginia, the licensed buyers, and do everything we can to maximize those opportunities. Because we recognize that beyond 500,000 licensed anglers in Virginia, freshwater fishing is more than $600 million a year into the Virginia economy. And when we get the kind of points there about why fishing is important or why to get involved, even if somebody doesn't fish, this is a huge economic contributor. Just to give you a rough idea how much fishing will put into the economy. So I'm lucky enough to address the Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus on a fairly regular basis. The only caveat is that meeting starts at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it is at the Richmond Capitol, so it's a very early morning. Sportsmen get up early, not surprising, but 7 o'clock. One of the things I like to showcase to them is talking about how much a fishing trip or how much an angler adds to the economy. Average bass angler fishes 30 days a year, and I'll get into some of that in my presentation. But if you consider the amount of gas, snacks, and everything you buy, it costs about $80 to go bass fishing. I really hope my wife does not find out how much it costs to go bass fishing, because that bass boat is in addition to the cost, $80 a trip, 30 trips a year. I'm looking at about $2,800 a year just in expenses in the economy. That's gas, that's my Diet Dr. Pepper that I have to have, that's the chicken biscuit, and that's not any of the fishing tackle. So when people might look at you and say, why is fishing important? Aside from the fact that fishing is awesome, it's an economic engine. And that was one of the things that came through with lunch today and the importance of this. Fishing is not only important because it's fun, fishing is an important contributor to the economy in this area. So jumping into that, how do we manage fish? Fisheries management, in principle, is one of the simplest things you can come up with. In practice, it's incredibly difficult. But there's three main components of it that we need to understand. There's the fish, there's the environment, and there are the people. And we work on all three of these aspects on a statewide basis to better understand how to manage fisheries. And I'm going to go through each of them. And one thing I want to stress as I go through this, I will talk for a very long time if I am allowed to. I have no problem being stopped if there's a question. I would much rather have back and forth on issues that are there. So if something is of interest and is of concern, let's go through it. Let's talk about it. Because I want to make sure that we help to establish a good relationship between DWR and the club. And I would say, I hope we do. I'm really impressed at everything that I see, and I'm also really impressed at how engaged this club is. I have been fishing since I was a teenager, involved with bass clubs. You guys are, without a doubt, the most engaged fishing club I have encountered over the course of my time as an angler and my career as a professional in this field. And I remember Chad had mentioned something he was involved with promoting youth fishing. And I took all veneer of polish that I have, because I'm more of a politician these days than a scientist. And I just look at it and I said, you guys rock. When I hear about that type of stuff, you guys have got the coolers there with the fish heads. You guys are putting your money where your mouth is. I'm really impressed. And you guys should all be commended about it. I know Chad said there's some ways for you guys to improve. That's very true. But as far as angling groups go, you guys should be really impressed, really proud, and I'd strongly encourage you guys to keep the momentum going. But jumping on the fish, just as a fun backstory, that is the first saw guy and the only saw guy I ever caught out of Lake Chesden a bunch of years ago. It was delicious, but I had to put it in there. So getting into that, just general fisheries management, I'm going to go through what I think are kind of the two big fisheries of interest to this group. Just looking at striped bass. Current regs are 2 per day, and Dan, correct me if by some reason I pulled the wrong table out of the reg guide, because I live in fear of misinterpreting that regulation guide every single time I open it. The background on that is we actually have our fishing regulations are complex because we have a variety of different resources across the state, a variety of different climates, geographic regions. And one of the best parts about living in Virginia is we're lucky enough to live in a state where you can go out to Smith Mountain Lake and catch a 5-pound largemouth in 85 feet of water, but you can also go out to the Chickahominy River and catch yourself a 10-pound largemouth. You can go out to the New River and get a 5-pound smallmouth or an 8-pound walleye. You can go out in the Chesapeake Bay. There's still some stripers out there. I know that's of concern. You can get very big striped bass out there. You can go to the mountains and catch trout. We have complex regulations because we have a complex state. And when we tune those regulations, we try to maximize what we're able to provide out of a lake. So at Smith Mountain, you guys know more about striper management than I ever will out here. But you know, you got your basic regulations there with the no harvest part in the wintertime, presumably to keep those larger fish into the system because they're so valuable and so interesting to the group there. I think this is a really great way to maximize the opportunity that's there because you're allowing those fish to be recycled a couple of times. And remember, for a fish to get to be be 38 inches, it has to be 36. And for it to get to be 36, it has to get 34. That fish is harvested at 34, it's never gonna hit 38, 40, or 42. And I saw, I think, Tommy's picture of that fish that he has back there. It's bigger than the screen there. I was really impressed. I was fully prepared to tell you a story of my biggest striper, but I felt really insecure at that point because my striper was not only smaller, I caught it out of the Atlantic. So congratulations. It takes a lot for me to be a little insecure when it comes to catching fish. But I bring up other things there, like there's no minimum in the middle of the summer. That no minimum there is, again, to maximize opportunity. Those fish, there's a higher mortality rate there. I know that clubs like this have been big on concepts such as catch your two and leave to try to minimize some of the waste that might happen. But you guys have also been very supportive, personally hosting researchers who have gone out there to better understand what those release rates are. And I think having a better idea of survival, knowing it's higher than we expected, but still, or I'm sorry, lower than expected, but still relatively high, allows you as anglers to make more informed decisions about how long you want to go out there, how much you want to catch out of the lake. And as conservation minded as you all are, I'm actually reasonably confident that you guys can maximize what's going on there. I'm also very impressed that you guys engage Dan as much as you do, and also that you go out to places like Vic Thomas Hatchery to, really see what's going on there. Right now, there are no plans to change for 2027. Unless Dan's gonna slide something in under the radar, I gotta have that ready in about 2 weeks. Just so you know, for regulations, I'm gonna be looking at flathead catfish and rock bass, and I will get more in detail on that when we get to the how you get involved portion of this talk. Now, one thing I wanna note is we do a lot of work with size and bag limits. I try to do my best with my group to avoid seasonal restrictions because I think they're confusing and I think they can oftentimes limit recreational opportunity unless there's a solid biological case. So these seasonal differences you see here on Smith Mountain Lake, those have a biological case. Same reason you see a seasonal difference on something like gar and bowfin, where you can keep fewer gar and bowfin during the spawning season. We recognize that that can be a little confusing. We do it sparingly. And you'll notice there that I put hook and line only and no changes to allowable gear. Why did I bring no changes to allowable gear? I'm gonna take my first grenade out for the day, pull the pin on it and roll it in the room. Forward-facing sonar. Who here has forward-facing sonar? Who here does not like forward-facing sonar? Be honest, nobody's gonna run you out of here. Oh, this is easy then. We're not gonna restrict forward-facing sonar.
That seems to be more prevalent in the bass fishing community. Like, you've got a group that just despises.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring that one up very specifically. One of my goals as fisheries chief is to keep regulations as simple as possible and interfere with people as little as possible. So our goal is always to manage based off of science, what is needed with the fishery. So in a situation like forward-facing sonar, we would tweak size and bag limits if and only if we had a problem that we could detect through our sampling. The challenge with that, is Chad alluded to, is there's a lot of concern from different angler groups about forward-facing sonar and the impacts it has on it, on different fisheries. It's a real big contentious issue within the black bass fishing community, the guys that fish for largemouth and smallmouth. Let you know, I got a good friend of mine up in Connecticut, called me up, I think he had a couple of beers, and he said, Mike, when are you gonna ban forward-facing sonar in Virginia? And I'm sitting there, and this guy's come up with some crazy, the guy's the best man at my weddings. I guess I shouldn't tell you who I associate with, but I hang around all sorts of people. Now, his name was John. I said, John, what are you talking about? He's like, you're in a position to do the right thing on this. And I said, what are you talking about? He doesn't like it because he views it as an issue of fair chase. I personally think he doesn't understand how to use it. I've spent a lot of time fishing with him on the boat. I've seen him struggle to operate his depth finder. But it highlights the level of contention on that, and there are a lot of people like that. And the challenge with that is if forward-facing sonar is your ethical issue or your concern issue, think about some of the other gear types. It's really a difficult thing to do when you start to look at what impacts things might have. So planer boards might be something somebody might be concerned about. Alabama rigs might be something somebody's concerned about. Single hooks versus treble hooks. We get a lot of pressure for some fairly exotic gear restrictions. My goal is to stick to the science wherever possible, and if we see anything on forward-facing sonar, it's not going to be a technology restriction. We would change a size or bag limit, and I expect the first of those size or bag limits to change to be several years off, informed by study and data, and likely on one of the harvest-oriented fisheries like crappie. It's probably going to be crappie that drives a lot of this. But another thing to consider with this gear too is realize that the anglers that utilize this type of gear are generally well-informed anglers who respect science, respect size and bag limits, and are very likely to comply with it. It's not the folks that are doing a lot of illegal harvest that are going to go spend $5,500, which is what I'm going to try to explain to my delightful wife when I go to Greentop tomorrow to pick up my car at headquarters. Thank you, Chad. I might be sleeping in your basement.
You're gone.
But that's kind of where we are on something like that with gear. So keep that in mind. Our goal is to try to keep things as simple as possible. We really don't want to interfere with what you do. We're really trying.
Hey, can I
Yes, sir. What you got?
yeah, for bass fishing, what's your thought being from the side for bed fishing?
I'm glad you brought up bed fishing. Let me get to my next slide.
Oh, okay.
But-
Well, anyway, this lake getting pressured, they get so many tournaments every year. The guy catches a 5-pounder and a 6-pounder, and they go down the lake and they weigh it and they throw it back in. Some of them, they take them out. And then I heard up the northern states, sometimes the lakes goes open up to after the spawn season. And I don't know if that's anything, you know, some people say, well, they ought to wait after the spawn season to have the tournament. So what's your view?
Let's unpack this one. Let's get to the first point. Bass are really good at making bass. How many of you went out to the Vic Thomas trip to see the striped bass? Same principle applies. How many eggs did they get out of one individual striped bass? Tens of thousands of eggs out of one of those striped bass. We stock all of Virginia's waters with striped bass on the backs of about a dozen pairs of striped bass. You have to understand that the average fish is a dead fish. And by that I mean over the course of a largemouth bass's life, it needs to produce, a female largemouth needs to produce 2 fish that make it to adulthood. So if that female lays 25,000 eggs 3 times, that's 75,000 eggs. Of those 75,000 eggs, 2 need to survive to adulthood. So realistically, a place like Smith Mountain Lake could be supported by very few spawning pairs of fish if they're successful. Now there's a whole lot that goes into it. I bring that point up because it highlights how much pressure you can put on a fishery before you collapse it. The other point I'm going to bring up, and I'm glad you brought up the seasonal closures up north, because here's the challenge with it. Okay, you don't like to bed fish, and I'm not pointing you out specifically on that, I'm just as an example. Say you don't like to bed fish. That's fantastic. Are you fishing up shallow during the spring? Because you're catching a lot of fish blind on beds. A really great way to catch fish off of a bed is you know where the bed is, you leave it alone for 2 hours, you stay 70 feet away from it, and you hook your Senko out there from 70 feet away, because that fish is a whole lot easier to catch if she does not know you're there. I do that on purpose if I find them. If you're fishing up shallow in the spring, you are catching bedding fish. Going beyond that, you fish in the early spring. Okay, water's 56 degrees, fish aren't spawning, I'm not having an impact. You catch that fish before she moves up to spawn or before he goes up to make that nest, you've stressed that fish out. Okay, so now we've looked at just the spawning window, we've gone a little earlier. How early do you go on that one? It's a great question. You go a little bit later. I am probably in 2 weeks, my phone is about to light up about fish that look terrible. As bass get through the spawn, their immune system is weakened, it's very stressful for them. We start to see a lot of lesions and marks on the fish. What are those? Those are secondary infections. It's the same reason where if you get stressed out at work, you get stressed out with life, you're more likely to get a cold, you're more likely to get sick, things take longer to heal. Same principle. Those fish are stressed out there. Okay, I'm done. The fish are done spawning. Now I'm fishing for post-spawn fish. Well, now you're fishing for fish that are stressed out. So you got 2 options on something like that. You either close it through the entire expanse of the spawning season, which in a place like Virginia, we'd be looking at any point in Virginia between late February or even mid-February when you get out in the far southeastern part to mid-June, you have fish in some phase of the spawn, whether it's pre-spawn, the spawn, or post-spawn. You're looking at potentially, if you really wanted to get rid of the impacts of angling for fish during the spawn, you'd be looking at closing for 5 or 6 months out of the year. Largemouth bass are pursued by 70% of Virginia anglers. Smallmouth are pursued by 60% of Virginia anglers. They're likely in the neighborhood of $200 to $300 million a year minimum in economic impact, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of anglers that are there. We have no strong scientific basis to make something like that. We're going to deprive everybody of that type of recreational opportunity. I don't think it's the right thing to do. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm a bass fisherman. I love to fish for spawning bass. But I see no compelling reason, I will own this as fish chief, to go in there and start to close off all of that opportunity for these fish that are out there. That's my point of view as the head policy person. That's the case behind it. I'm happy to discuss further any follow-up or challenges to that. You know, one of the challenges about doing what I do, and we'll get into this later, I get very little public input. It's very unusual to get any public input on any issue, so a lot of times I'm working with my staff to use best professional judgment, and oftentimes I don't hear from anglers till after the fact. So I bring that up, I lay that out very specifically, knowing that I'm being recorded, and that knowing that this is going to be available, because I want folks to know where I stand, where I'm approaching it, and if somebody has an issue with it, I got a stack of cards there on the counter in the back, I'd love to hear about it. All I ask is if you call me up, you have a solution. That is one thing. I will listen to your issue, but please come up. It doesn't have to be a good solution, but I just ask that you think it through far enough to come up with an idea or a path on it. I think that's only reasonable. Does that give you about 15 minutes to answer on that one?
Yeah.
So, getting into fisheries management on largemouth and smallmouth bass, here it's 5 per day, only 2 of which can be less than 14 inches. You should keep your small bass, they're good to eat. There's plenty of small bass. Chad also caught a very small bass today. So I heard it when he pulled it out. I heard new personal best, and I'm like, Chad, that fish is 7 inches long. So I admired his candor and honesty as an angler. But the one thing I want to bring up is 2 things here. The first is we are suspending our purchases of F1 bass indefinitely because we don't have the budgetary headroom to purchase something like that. I was the one that made that cut in the budget. I own any budget cut that comes out of the aquatics group. I made that decision because we had to come up with, and we'll get into ways in how we can address this, but I made that decision because we have to come up with a 10% budget reduction. So the way we got to our 10% budget reduction is I cut channel catfish, I cut a lot of habitat workout, I cut hybrid striped bass. So even though you guys are lucky enough to have the regular striped bass, hybrid striped bass are really the only option in places like Claytor and Anna to have a good open water fishery because the water quality is so bad. And hybrid striped bass will live just about anywhere. They're really tough, they get smaller. So I cut that out of the budget, and then I cut the F1 bass. And the reason all of those were cut is those are things that we have to purchase from outside the state. They're not things we can grow at our hatchery. I know there was a lot of panic, and I just glossed over it. We're not planning to cut striped bass production at Vic Thomas. That's a very cost-effective way for us to produce fish. We can produce striped bass, walleye, and even smallmouth bass very effectively at our hatcheries. It makes sense with Virginia's climate. I've got staff doing that work. They do a great job. I got to purchase these other fish. So those are fairly expensive. The one there that concerns me the most, and to level with you on why, I will be the first to admit that if the money came back in, catfish would be the first thing I'd put back in there. And I bring that up because one of the challenges we have is looking at things from a statewide basis. You all have a lot of very individual concerns, which are important. You need to express those. Looking at this from a statewide basis, those channel catfish fisheries are typically urban bodies of water or more developed bodies of water. There's get a lot of fishing pressure. They're, for a lot of people, the only opportunity they have to catch fish. 30% of our anglers fish for channel catfish. They're more popular than inland striped bass, believe it or not. pulling those out of the budget is taking away a lot of recreational opportunity, and it's taking away entire fisheries. But I don't have an option right now. I am trying to keep the wheels on the bus until we can get the funding situation resolved. So those are coming out of it. Why would it be prioritized over F1 largemouth bass? Smith Mountain Lake has a fantastic largemouth bass fishery. Smith Mountain Lake will have a fantastic largemouth bass fishery with no additional F1 bass stockings in it. The F1s are an addition. We're looking at them as a way to grow some larger bass. We're trying to figure out where it benefits and what it does, but we're looking at an addition to an existing fishery and a fishery that will persist at high quality without stocking. That channel catfish fishery does not exist without the stocking, so that's why I prioritize that. And again, I have cards out there. My goal is transparency. I want people to let me know. I want people to ask me questions about why we do what we do, because that is the goal. I want to make sure that you all understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and if you disagree with it, I'm going to tell you how to do it. I will give you directions on how to get to one of our board meetings if you are going to directly criticize the path that we are putting through, because I think public engagement is that important. It's a fundamental principle of how we operate as society. So any discussion on F1 bass? There we go. I got a couple of hands. You, sir.
Just one question. We've been doing this, I guess, or others will do it for a number of years. Genetically, is there enough of the F1 strain in the current bass population so it will continue through natural reproduction?
I'm glad you asked that question, because this is actually one of the first things that comes up. It looks like the advantage we see with the stocked fish is they're a little bit bigger than the naturally spawned fish. And it's just like you don't want to get behind the big guy at the buffet because he's good at eating. I've been the big guy at the buffet. They grow faster, and that growth advantage seems to continue on. The background genetics of largemouth bass throughout Virginia are naturally about 50-50 northern and Florida because of all the bass we've moved around. So when you worry about the genetics getting passed on, it's irrelevant. It's just that initial growth advantage. And we purchased the F1 bass because it's just not effective to grow largemouth bass at our hatcheries. And to be completely honest, because largemouth bass persist without hatchery additions, I'm going to prioritize hatchery production to striped bass and walleye. I've actually talked with a constituent who is adamant that we should stop producing striped bass and grow largemouth bass at our fish hatcheries. I told him in no uncertain terms we were not going to do that. He was not happy. He called his elected officials. His elected official was not happy. But that was the right call, because then I'd be looking at cutting back on striped bass, which striped bass are actually another example like the channel catfish. That striped bass fishery doesn't exist without any stocking. Somebody is inserting tongue twisters into this whole thing. If we stopped stocking striped bass, we would not have a striped bass fishery in Smith Mountain Lake. You, sir.
You mentioned that we buy fish from other states. Do we sell a lot of fish to other states?
We don't sell fish to other states. I'm a big believer. So this actually came up with smallmouth bass. So we are the #1 stocker of smallmouth bass in the country. The folks at Front Royal produce 280,000 smallmouth bass. I am absolutely blown away by that, because I can't tell you how much that saves relative to the private sector, because I can't buy smallmouth bass from the private sector. It's a unique resource. So the question actually came up of, well, can you sell them? The reason why I wouldn't advocate for selling fish out of the hatcheries and would hold that line pretty strongly is I think those fish are better stocked in Virginia. Virginia anglers are the ones that pay for those fish to be grown. I think they should benefit Virginia anglers. The only caveat to that one is sometimes we will give surplus fish away to other states. Oftentimes we will get fish from other states. You know, some of the muskie we get from North Carolina. They help us out, so we try to work with other states. So the only exception there would be to help out some of the other states. It's the only reason we have a northern pike fishery in Virginia. New Jersey is really good at creating northern pike in their hatcheries. New Jersey gives us northern pike on a regular basis. The folks at Mott's Run have a real unique fishery up there. Anybody wants to make the trip to Mott's Run? Here's your tip for catching northern pike. Take the most expensive bait you have in your box with treble hooks on it, throw it on an 8-pound line, you will catch all the pike you ever wanted. I grew up north. I'm real good at catching pike. They like jerk baits. Anything else on the F1s before we move on?
Do you stock smallmouth?
We do not. You turn it back.
doesn't really relate to this specifically, but I notice when I catch a striper, it's got copepods in its mouth, but I've never caught a largemouth bass that has copepods in its mouth. Is there a reason why the largemouth don't seem to get the copepods and the stripers do?
I would suspect it's what they would call host specific, where those copepod, oh, Dan, thank you, Dan.
Those parasites, their life cycle, the way they lay their eggs and everything, they infect communal schooling fish. So basically, the stripers, the parasites laying their eggs and they've got to get on another host almost immediately. And the stripers being a schooling fish like they are, they're just passing it back and forth. Bass do get them, but it's real low densities. It's when we had the problem when it first started out, we would see copepods in the bass, probably 15% of the time. And it'd be one or two. And it'd be such low rates, even when they had them, we didn't even notice it, because they were just so few. So they do infect other species, but the schooling activity and reproductive system, the way those parasites reproduce, it just makes them susceptible to picking them back up. So just the buddy system, they just like to keep passing back.
What he said. But anything else on F1 bass? I don't want to gloss over that because I know that we've got some hot button issues, and that's what I want to talk about when they come up. But now I want to highlight what I think is our biggest hot button issue, and I know the angling community has been big on this, and my folks have heard about this one probably more than I'd ever like to. Alabama bass. Alabama bass, from an invasive species perspective, are public enemy #1 in Virginia. I know you hear about blue catfish. I know you hear about northern snakehead. If you ever want to hear about blue catfish, give me a call. You will not get those 2 hours of your life back. But on the Alabama bass, you have a fish that does two things that are really concerning from an invasive standpoint beyond the economic impact. They interbreed with smallmouth. So largemouth and smallmouth, I have never handled a largemouth smallmouth hybrid. I've worked in this field as a professional. I have caught thousands of bass. I have never handled a largemouth smallmouth hybrid. They just don't occur that often. Alabama bass will breed readily with anything that's not a largemouth. So there are huge issues with Alabama bass crossing with smallmouth. And if you catch a meanmouth, you can go to Philpott, it's loaded with them. They're cool, I'll give you that. They're an interesting thing to catch, but they're very undesirable because when you start to see the meanmouth show up, you're losing your smallmouth bass population. And there are multiple case studies further south where we have lost smallmouth bass fisheries because of hybridization with Alabama bass. Gone. We have issues in the further parts of the southeast. Anybody ever fish for red eye or shoal bass down in Georgia, Alabama? I figured this is the type of group where I know you guys travel and fish for interesting things. There are huge issues with Alabama bass hybridizing with red eyes and shoal bass down there. It's a real terrible resource issue because once you lose that genetic integrity, it's gone. The other thing with Alabamas is they outcompete largemouth bass. That statement, let me put a little bit of gravity on that one. The reason why largemouth bass are the most popular fish in North America to fish for is because largemouth bass do very well just about anywhere. From an ecological perspective, a largemouth bass is incredibly invasive. It is the top predator in its ecosystem. It can eat a variety of different things. It does well just about anywhere. For an Alabama bass to outcompete a largemouth bass is huge. And systems like what I saw at Smith Mountain Lake today are systems that I think would be absolutely prime for Alabama bass to take over and take out largemouth bass. Why would that necessarily be a bad thing? If I still haven't convinced you of this, please listen to what I am about to tell you. Anybody fish Lake Gaston or Lake Norman lately? Okay, they're full of small Alabama bass. Lake Norman lost 90% of the largemouth bass that were available, and now it is full of 12-inch Alabama bass. I mentioned I used to tournament fish a lot. I lived in Georgia. I fished for Alabama bass in Lake Jackson. The smallest bag of 5 bass I ever weighed in was 4.8 pounds. Wow. They were 5 Alabama bass, and each one of them was 12 inches or better. That is not a good thing. And I imagine folks here, I know Chad has fished some of the fisheries out there. If anybody's ever fished a place like Lake Lanier, it has really big Alabama bass. That's not typically what happens. Those are really unique cases. So any sort of introduction on Alabama bass, you're playing Russian roulette. You introduce something like that, you are directly threatening your largemouth bass fishery and your smallmouth bass fishery. Those are very bad things. There is no way for us to recover from something like that. There's nothing we can do with removals. Prevention is the only thing to do it. And my ask to you, in addition to not moving them around, my ask is twofold. One, if you catch something that looks like a spotted bass or an Alabama bass, the spotted bass or the Alabama bass is there on the bottom right, they're functionally identical to a spotted bass. Kill it, save it, and call us so we can do genetic testing so we at least know what we have. We suspect people have tried to introduce Alabama bass. And where I get in with that is if, I know how fishing communities are, and I bring up that my same friend who was concerned about forward-facing sonar, and again, maybe I really need to evaluate who I hang out with. I actually suspect he likes to watch some of these videos occasionally, so he might get a kick out of this if I share it with him. When I moved out of Georgia, he wondered if I could bring up some Alabama bass to Connecticut and put them in Colebrook River Lake. Now this was one of those couple of beers kind of conversations, but I think he was serious. And I know there are anglers out there that are serious about it, because if there weren't, we wouldn't have people moving these things around Virginia. So what I need to happen is for folks, when you hear about things like this, moving fish around is a very big conservation concern. It is more important than any sort of catch and release, any other things that I know anglers stick up for. So keep that in mind. It's a bad thing. And I will give credit where credit's due. One of the most organized groups of anglers I've encountered is the Bass Federation of Virginia. John Fleechek's our conservation director, great guy. Virginia Bass Nation has also been very supportive. BASS National has been supportive. They have provided us a lot of support for this campaign, and they're working with the other bass anglers to kind of build on that ethic. So they're working on it too. I'm just, again, I'm in a religious facility, so I'm going to preach. And I'm going to preach about preventing Alabama bass from being moved around. So if you catch inklings in your conversations, please, there are huge consequences, and once they're in there, nobody can save it. So keep that in mind. That is my public enemy number one, is Alabama bass. And again, if you catch one, keep it. Let us know. Beyond that, I want to get into the environment side of things. So we talked a little bit about the fish with a focus on some Smith Mountain Lake issues. I want to get into the environment. There we go. So you all know, I pulled these slides out. So I gave a presentation at the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies about habitat management in Virginia. And the reason I did that is in Virginia, we only have 1.5 natural lakes. We have Lake Drummond, and then we have Mountain Lake. I call Mountain Lake half a lake because it drains sporadically, and I don't think it's fair to call it a full lake. So in contrast to the Northeast, we have artificial lakes. We have artificial systems. That's a big difference. And they have different challenges. So Smith Mountain Lake's 20,000 acre reservoir, as you all know, it's heavily developed and heavily utilized. And one of the things I wanted to highlight to the group there is grass carp are not just a Smith Mountain Lake issue. They're not just a Virginia issue. They are an issue and a concern across the United States and up and down the eastern seaboard. Hydrilla is a big problem in Connecticut. Again, my same friend up there is very concerned about hydrilla in the Connecticut River. And finally, I see a glimmer of sense out of the man as he's concerned about it. But how they manage it is complicated. And I bring up Connecticut because Connecticut overstocked grass carp in Candlewood Lake and actually had to do targeted removals. That's bad. And that's where I'm going to get into how we're looking at it here at Smith Mountain Lake. I know that when grass carp were introduced back around 2011, there was a 13,000, Dan, were put in? 6,000. Still so many zeros in there that get me concerned. We call them a nuclear option. If you put enough grass carp in, you will get rid of every piece of vegetation in a lake. Okay. Vegetation's still a problem for a lot of folks there. How do you manage that? It's kind of a balancing act. So one of the things that led up to this week, and one of the reasons where I do want to say hats off to this club, is in my time at DWR, there have been two issues that have brought people to the boardroom. The first one was blue catfish, and the blue catfish guide showed up. The second one was Smith Mountain Lake grass carp. So the biggest comment we got this winter, and I imagine many of you wrote those comments, were on stocking grass carp. Thank you for doing that. When you do that, you provide us input on what issues are of concern to you, and you provide a lot of backing to bring it up to the board as an issue. The other thing you did is John made the trip out to Richmond, and John went up and talked before the Wildlife and Boat Committee about grass carp. So what you did there is you guys got engaged in the process. You weighed in and you represented yourselves there because you are a stakeholder in this. Okay, that's great. We've got the angler side weighing in. We heard from the non-angler side of things, trying to manage that type of setup. For them, hydrilla has different concerns. If you look at it and kind of consider, and I'm always big on, I always ask people to reflect on other people's points of view because I think that it's important to respect where people are coming from. And I'm a big believer in listen even if you don't agree with it because you can learn from it or at very least understand it. Hydrilla at very high densities, for any of you that live on this lake, you don't want that in front of your dock. I mean, I love hydrilla. I might be tempted to throw patio pavers out there to create holes in it, but it's not going to be a desirable situation. So we've got a circumstance where we have anglers who are concerned about it, who generally value vegetation as habitat, and folks that live on the lake that might be concerned about this in their front yard. Those groups have something in common, and finding those commonalities is important. Everybody wants to see a healthy ecosystem in Smith Mountain Lake. Everybody likes the economic and recreational benefits that are in Smith Mountain Lake, or at least 95% of people do. There's a lot of common ground there. How do you do that? You talk through contentious issues. So on Wednesday, so we heard from John and the Smith Mountain Lake Striper Club about their concerns with hydrilla. We heard from TLAC about their interest in stocking grass carp. I got a lot of communications back and forth on it. So on Wednesday, Director Brown and I met with Dan and then Scott Smith, who's our regional manager out in Region 2, and talked about it. When we first got into that room, it was very contentious. And I think we landed in a good spot, and I'll tell you where we landed. So I knew, and I'll give credit again to the Striper Club, the communications I saw is you guys were completely realistic about the concerns that were there, and you didn't go scorched earth and say, absolutely not, under no circumstances is this acceptable. You said that looking at the information we have, we think this number is acceptable. Okay, you guys came to the table, negotiated in good faith. So we led with that number. That number was 200. When I first mentioned 200, I could very clearly tell that the tension in that room was up to 11. I do a lot of this public hearing stuff for a living. That was one of the most tense environments I've been in. And what was driving that tension was concern about how we were going to address hydrilla and what we would do moving forward. So as we kind of talked through it, we mentioned that we have a lot of uncertainties. There's a lot of data we don't have. We really don't know. We do know that hydrilla is in the lake. We do know that hydrilla is expanding. We do know that something needs to be done to keep her from getting to nuisance levels. Okay, those are all statements of fact. The data is really fuzzy at this point. And we work with fuzzy data all the time in fisheries. For those of you who work in the banking industry, the amount of uncertainty we deal with making decisions will blow your mind with confidence intervals, but we have to make the best decision. So we recommended 200. We talked through it. It became apparent that in the fall, AEP is going to do a comprehensive survey of the hydrilla and the vegetation that's in Smith Mountain Lake. Okay, good. We're going to get a lot more data this fall. That's going to help us to understand what's going on. So we were then talking about what was the next step. So it came up that, well, we'd reconsider stocking additional carp. And this is why I want to make sure I have an exit there when I confess to what I suggested. Another 200 was floated, and I stopped there and I said, no. I think it's only fair, if we're going to take a data-driven approach, we see what's going on, and if the TLAC board approves 700, we consider those next 500 if the data supports the stocking there. Because realize this situation. There's about 50 acres of hydrilla in that lake right now. What if we find out there's 270 acres of hydrilla after this survey? I think it's only prudent that we take that data-driven approach and we make an informed decision about it. And that's the path we're trying to take. And everybody was in agreement on that path. I know everybody in this group, you guys are very science-oriented. I feel very respected as a scientist in this group. That doesn't happen with every group I walk into. I am constantly dealing with folks that don't respect science as a discipline, so I really appreciate that. But I think we've laid the groundwork, and at lunch today, I can tell you on Tuesday, I figured today's lunch was either going to be the most stressful environment I have ever been in, or one of the most productive environments. And because we went into that room with that productive idea put forth, it gave us a really good opportunity to identify common ground. And I don't want to speak for everybody else in the room, but I left with the impression that there were 6 or 7 items of agreement. There were 6 or 7 items that there could be collaboration with from groups that historically have not collaborated as well as we possibly could have. And I think it's important to build on that, because the more you work together on these type of issues, the more you can unite on common issues, because there's a lot of commonalities there. And I think it's important. My challenge for all of you is to build on that and keep working in good faith, because I'm really pleased with it. And I bring it up because I'm hoping that we see a situation like Lake Anna. I think Lake Anna is one of the best managed systems from a vegetation standpoint. At Lake Anna, they use herbicide applications in certain areas and low density stockings of grass carp. That's a big testament to engaging the community. And when challenged for a plan, this is what I sent over to TLAC for them to work on and develop. And you can see here, I guess the font's real small, you're gonna have to take my word for it. What you see there is data and history there that's driving the numbers that are stocking there. This is all transparent. This is readily available on the internet. You send me an email, I'll send you the plan. Transparency and data, that's the goal. Making informed decisions. I am very optimistic that we can see it on Smith Mountain Lake. And for those of you who are concerned about other areas, we've also had this come up in Claytor Lake. And one of the challenges we saw at Claytor Lake was a lack of angler engagement. So you guys are several steps ahead of it. I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I'd encourage you to work with the different groups around here, find items of joint interest, work together. I think there's a lot of power there. I think you can leverage all of that. You're all looking out for your community. John?
Just to be clear, what's on the screen now is Lake Anna?
Yes, it is Lake Anna. Okay. We're not this far, and we honestly won't be this far until we get some more of that information there. But I also thought, again, y'all have to understand, I'm a government employee. I often tell people that they need to come up with plans, paperwork, and documentation. I hate plans, paperwork, and documentation, and I don't like asking people to do it. But this is important enough that I only thought it was fair to come up with an example and a template to work on. So one thing you will notice about this plan, it's also not 782 pages. It's about 7. That seems reasonable. We don't like 700-page plans, unless it's stock trout. Then apparently we do that.
What herbicide are they using at Anna?
Pardon?
What herbicide are they using at Lake Anna? You said it's a 2.
Herbicide, I'd have to check on that one. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I am happy, I got my cards in the back there. I am happy to elaborate on that. I'm happy to send you the plan. Because I do think the herbicide, so the herbicide was not really a point of agreement at this point, but herbicides are going to be one of the best ways to deal with those acute issues that come up. And I think it's important that landowners would have access to herbicides if they have that specific issue. Again, thinking about it from their perspective, those herbicides are very heavily regulated. They're safe when applied within the confines of what the restrictions are. And looking at it from the perspective, even if you love hydrilla, you've got to understand that somebody might not want a mat of hydrilla that's 3 acres in front of their dock and no ability to access the water. I think that's only fair to consider that. And I think herbicides provide those opportunities where grass carp aren't going to necessarily work quick enough. Or alternatively, I'd envision getting ideally in a system where it's balanced enough where we just live with some hydrilla. If we're living with some hydrilla, we're still going to see those acute issues unless we go scorched earth. I don't think scorched earth is a reasonable expectation, so I think herbicides are a good supplement to it. And that's how it's worked on Anna. So, anything else on grass carp? Yes, sir.
Does hydrilla have any good purpose?
Hydrilla provides habitat.
I didn't know if there was too much or too low.
Too much is not a good thing. So with vegetation, so one of the things, so I've spent a lot of time around different kinds of vegetation. I grew up in New England. There's vegetation in just about every lake up there. When you have really high densities of vegetation, you can get very stagnant conditions in that vegetation. You can get into systems where all the vegetation below the top is dead. All that dead vegetation consumes oxygen. You get in situations at night where the oxygen starts to sag and things can get toxic to, or cannot support aquatic life. I've seen situations in a previous life. I did some eel work up on Lake Sebastian in Massachusetts. I'm interested in assessing the eel population before and after fish passage. I had to stop putting my eel pots in the milfoil beds because the oxygen would get so low it would kill an eel. Any of you ever handled an eel? Yeah, an eel is one of the most difficult things you can kill. The conditions get so bad when the vegetation's at that level that it can kill eels. So too much vegetation is a bad thing. We generally try to manage for about 15 to 30% vegetation coverage in our lakes. 30% isn't reasonable for Smith Mountain Lake given the different things, and it's not likely to happen given the way the sides are. But having open conversations with different groups about what is and is not acceptable and working towards managing that is the path there. As another benefit on hydrilla in our tidal systems, because hydrilla can be so aggressive, it actually is a first invader that goes into, anybody have sweet gums in their yard after you clear out stuff? Those things are the biggest pain in the butt to manage in my yard because I actively do wildlife habitat, and when a tree falls, I gotta trim all the sweet gums. Hydrilla is like a sweet gum in a tidal system. It's the first thing to grow, it grows up quickly. But what ends up happening that we've seen is it actually stabilizes the system so other vegetation gets established, and hydrilla is ultimately outcompeted in places. So hydrilla is not necessarily a bad thing. Not necessarily a good thing. Too much of it is a very bad thing. So this, again, is looking at how we manage it, how we work within those confines. Other hydrilla or grass carp. You, sir.
I can maybe say this with some accuracy because I've seen it. I know that grass carp eat, not grass carp, common carp eat bass eggs, and we catch them with a silver buddy in the mouth. So am I true by saying the common carp go around sucking up eggs?
Common carp are something we're almost in universal agreement as a department are not a good thing. I have personally seen somebody in this room eradicate carp out of one of the systems they manage. But where are you going with that?
Do grass carp eat bass eggs?
No. Grass carp, and Dan, correct me on that one. So carp is like minnow or bass. It's something that can apply to a variety of different fish species. A grass carp is not that closely related to a common carp. So a common carp is what they call a benthic feeder. It roots around on the bottom. That's why the fish eggs, they stir up a lot of sediment. They're generally not a desirable fish for us to have in most of our systems. The grass carp eats vegetation exclusively. Grass carp will actually start to graze bushes if they run out of vegetation that are overseeing it. A great way to catch grass carp is using cherry tomatoes for bait, actually, is a fun fact. So they are different.
The common carp that he was talking about are pretty invasive to that sometimes. That's their mechanism to get food is basically sucking up insects and things off the bottom, and if they get into eggs, they wouldn't mind that. So grass carp get kind of a bad lick for that because they're both carp. So you would think they're both going to consume some of the same stuff, but the grass carp aren't really endangering our beds.
Thank you, Dan. I didn't hear that much cohesion during your rage at Lake Burton with all of the carp, but I trusted your judgment. Anything else on carp before we move on? Hank?
The fluctuation of the lake being down as low as it is now, wouldn't it kill off a lot of that vegetation?
So, in theory, you would think so. And the way they manage a lot of lakes up north for things like Eurasian milfoil is they do the drawdown. So Candlewood Lake that I alluded to historically was drawn down 6 or 7 feet because I got my trailer hung up there and ruined the axle a couple of years ago trying to launch on some gravel. It was a bad idea. But that will kill things like Eurasian milfoil. You also have a much colder climate up there. The problem with hydrilla is it roots in the sediment. So even the low water we're seeing now, the stuff there that's exposed is likely going to survive this. Now, it's not going to grow actively because there's no water above it. But when that water comes up, it's going to resume growing. So the drawdowns aren't as effective as we'd see for something like Eurasian water milfoil. So if that was the case, we'd be looking at a situation where this low water would probably buy us another 2 years before we'd have to take any kind of action. Unfortunately, there's no real silver lining to the low water level at this point. Others on carp? Hydrilla? No, perfect. Time for me to go home then. Anyways, another one here that I want to highlight, and I saw these over by Chad's dock, and I have helped Dan put these out, are these artificial structures. These are durable plastic, wood, concrete, different things that go out there. These provide really great habitat. I know many of you have them under your docks. I know many of you have helped put these in. I've been lucky enough to dive on these and actually see what lives on them. They're really great habitat, and these are a really good way to supplement what's available. Now, we have questions about whether they make a system more productive or if they attract fish. That's a lecture for another day, but this is generally a positive thing. It's funded by AEP, Smith Mountain Lake Association supported it, and there's a map of all the habitat locations that are out there. So if anybody wants to find some good places to fish, those are going to be good ways to concentrate fish. I brought this up with the Northeast in particular because this is not something typically employed up in the Northeast with habitat management. This is more of a Southeastern type of thing, so I was trying to spread the word because I think this is a really great program. Moving beyond that, I want to talk about the people. A lot of us got into this field because we didn't particularly like people. We wanted to deal with fish, we wanted to deal with that. I say that in jest because it's the truth of it. You know, most of us are trained as scientists, that's our background. We recognize that even though we'd much rather work with fish, myself included, people are such an important part because they are the ones that benefit, they're ultimately our customers. You know, I'll talk later how we operate closer to a business than you would think as a state agency, but we recognize that anglers and people are our customers. So how do we understand our constituents? I talk about trying to figure out what's going on and how public comment's important. I got a question. Who here has ever been picked up by a creel survey, been interviewed on the water about what you caught? Good, we got a couple of hands. I've been picked up twice on Lake Chesden on that one and was only recognized one time. So I got to share my feedback. Who here has gotten the big mail-in survey? Anyone? No one? We need to send more out. Those type of surveys provide an idea of what's going on. So I'll get to the big angler survey first because that's the one there. This isn't, I have this available online if you're ever curious about it. This is what we send out, and this is how we understand who the average Virginia angler is and what they like. I am the average Virginia angler. I'm in my 40s, I'm a white guy, I live in the suburban part of Virginia. I am the mean Virginia angler. I usually like to bring in my good friend John Kirk because he's a few years older than me and he's actually the median age that we see, but John's not here tonight. But here's how we figure out what's going on. We know the mean days spent freshwater fishing in Virginia is 25 days for each Virginia angler. The average Virginia angler fishes 5 different places in the course of the year. This is also a really great one here. 19% of Virginia anglers fish large lakes. 19% of anglers are the folks that fish places like Smith Mountain, Lake Anna, Lake Chesden, Briary Creek, those bigger lakes. So keep that in mind that that's only about 1/5 of the effort. So as important as Smith Mountain Lake is to what we offer, 80% of the fishing effort in Virginia occurs on places that aren't large lakes. So there's a lot of other stuff we manage, there's a lot of other interesting opportunities. And going beyond that, what do people like to fish? This is a great slide because the first one up there is, are you a member of a fishing organization or club? And 91% of anglers are not members of fishing organizations or clubs. I'll tell you why that matters. Anglers are not organized. Anglers do not participate in comment processes. They do not participate in government. They do not participate in issues that pertain directly to them and might impact their quality of life. One of the biggest benefits you see out of getting involved with a fishing club is the fishing clubs do a really good job of advocating for interests, and within a fishing club, many of them have structures where people are set to look at policy issues, people are set to look into legislative recommendations. I can't lobby. You guys can, and it's critically important, even if you don't agree with something we're doing, to recognize that you need to represent your interests, you need to get involved with it. And some of these clubs there, like some of the most influential groups that you see throughout the country are groups like Trout Unlimited or groups like the Bass Angler Sportsman Society that are organized. There's power in that. The next one, This is my favorite question in there. This is a little bit of a diversion. What is your freshwater fishing experience level? Do you know that 37% of anglers think they're advanced and 10% of anglers think they're experts? That's really not true. I mean, I'm in the expert category. Chad's in the expert category, but you know, that's it. If you consider 10% of this room, that's about 5% of this room. So there's only 2 more of you here that are experts. I'll let you figure out who the experts are from there. But that's a fun one there. And then the next one, what fish did you fish for? When you hear me spout numbers about who's fishing for what, this is the information I'm drawing from. And you see here, 71% anglers fish for largemouth, 56% fish for smallmouth, 24% fish for striped bass or hybrid striped bass, and so on and so forth. And that helps us understand where people are targeting, what they're interested in, and this informs what we do in the hatcheries. Because I can tell you that number on striped bass provides very solid justification for why we produce striped bass at our hatcheries. And I know it's important to Smith Mountain Lake, but when I'm dealing with a constituent in Southeast Virginia who sees no benefit from stocking striped bass and wants us to grow largemouth bass, that's the case I can make. Again, we talk about data, we talk about information. Yes, sir.
Is there a qualitative aspect to that analysis where striper fishermen all buy boats and spend lots of money on gas, and people fishing for tailcats buy their fishing rod at Walmart?
I love that angle you're taking on this one. That's a challenging one, because I've made the exact point you're trying to make. And we run into this issue about how we treat different constituents and how we weight them. And it's a real challenging one. Because the point you're bringing up is I brought up with the bass fishing side of things. Serious anglers spend a lot of money. I know exactly where you're leading me on that one. Because the folks that are fishing for striped bass, they buy boats, they buy fuel, they buy a ton of tackle. Their contributions, hell, I'll give you an even more concrete thing about benefits to the local economy. Because I'm about to get my Chesterfield County personal property tax bill for my bass boat. And Chesterfield County gets $227 out of me every year for my bass boat. I keep telling them it's depreciating. It's not. They're getting revenue on that one. So I see the point you're going at. The challenge I have is managing as a statewide program. I do feel compelled to respect where other anglers are coming from. So those channel catfish anglers, those are folks that I think it's important to get them outside, and they also buy a license too. And I think it's a situation where we don't really have to make an ugly value judgment on something like that, because I think the angle you're taking is actually something that you all can use at a larger scale to talk to people about why what you do is important to the economy, why it's important to contributions. I mean, that tax-based thing alone on boat ownership is a huge one. And I think that's an important point, because a lot of times people don't realize, and I explain this to groups that might be a little more environmental oriented or don't fish, because I'm also big on, you need to respect people. And one of the big issues we run into with blue catfish is the blue catfish anglers just are oftentimes not treated with respect because the other folks don't supply any value to blue catfish. Fishing for a lot of people, particularly for folks who are taking time on their Friday night, is a way of life. This is something that is extremely important to you. And I think it's critically important to recognize that when you see something that might impact you and speak up. Because the point you're making about the importance of striped bass, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I'm here tonight talking to you all because I value the input you have and I respect the contributions you make. And it's a solid point. It's a difficult thing to consider though.
Got a few other angles on money if you've got a minute on that.
We will get to that later, but I'll stay here after. I'm open to it because I am going to make a pitch here. I'm setting you all up for a sales pitch, but I didn't give anybody any free steaks tonight. It's not in the budget. Going past that, how important or unimportant are things to you when you choose a location to go fishing? This helps us understand how things like the big things with fishing and getting people out there. People like stuff that's close to their house, and people don't have enough time to go fishing. That's basically what it comes down to. So we try to keep fishing opportunities close to home. I have asked every governor's administration I can for a day off to go fishing for everybody. We've been successful with getting extra free fishing days, but I have not been able to get everybody a day off to go fishing. I am trying. That is one of my career goals. Because I think that if everybody had a little more time to go fishing, more people would fish. I would take the day to do it. as I'm sure most of the room would. But this helps us better understand what those limitations and preferences are. Again, customer focus. This is similar to what you do for market research in the private sector. So going past that and how to get involved. So first of all, you guys, A+ students with getting involved. If you continued what you were doing, you're still going to be A students. I'd like to have other A students at the table, but you guys are setting the curve. The first way to get involved was with our regulatory process. So let's back up to Virginia civics here. The Code of Virginia is set by the General Assembly and ultimately approved by the governor. Those are the laws that are there. Those laws prescribe what the agencies can then do through regulation. They delegate powers, and if anybody's an attorney in here and wants to correct me, you're going to be able to absolutely torch me on this. So I ask that you don't stitch me up publicly. Those laws delegate authority to the different agencies that we then use with our regulatory authority to create regulation. So what I always like to tell people is if you have an issue with something that has to do with the regulations we have, that's 100% a call to my desk, because that's within our power to fix. And we go through a regulation cycle every other year for fish. The other side of things is hunting. So this year, in January, we had a public scoping period where we solicited contact and information from the general public. A+ students here, 39 comments on grass carp in Smith Mountain Lake. Biggest issue that showed up. The second issue is actually northern snakehead, and gentlemen spoke about northern snakehead at the committee meeting, which I think was great, because that's a group of anglers that I also don't think is being well represented. And though there's a lot of conflict there, I want that guy at the table. That guy needs to look out for what's interesting to him. And I talked to him about some paths and compromises that I think would be useful. I respect it. But we then present those issues at the March meeting. John came to Richmond. He presented at the committee meeting to talk about his concerns with grass carp, and then he presented at the board meeting to introduce the club, and then the conservation committee that's come out of it. Huge stuff. Really useful to get involved with it. What are the next steps? In May, I will be presenting staff recommendations on regulatory changes. The regulatory changes I'm looking at right now are going to be prohibitions on stocking flathead catfish and rock bass. So the way it works in Virginia is if you have a private body of water, you can stock nearly anything unless it's specifically excluded. I'm going to move to specifically exclude flathead catfish and rock bass. Rock bass hybridize with Roanoke bass, which Roanoke bass are really cool game fish. Anybody who's interested in shoal bass, ask me about Roanoke bass later on. I got the same kind of opportunity for you. The other one is with flathead catfish. Flathead catfish are a very invasive predator that eats a lot of different things. They're also delicious to eat if you catch one. I strongly encourage you to bring it home. But we don't want people moving them around. And this provides additional disincentives to move it around. And from a fisheries regulation standpoint, I think I got one more change to trout stocking that I have to do from a regulation. I am actually going to, and this is where I think the club would be useful if they have input on it, and this is more of an individual issue. We're going through a revision on our stock trout management plan. There are two things in that stock trout management plan that I think are relevant to anglers. One is we are going to change how we release information. Folks have been using the Freedom of Information Act to get trout stocking information so they can figure out where the stocking trucks are going. That's a real challenge for us, but that is the right of every citizen of Virginia. You know, transparency in government is fantastic, but sometimes it can cause some challenges. Overall, it's a good thing. The fact that it causes me a lot of a headache is no reason to fault transparency. Transparency is a good thing, to be very clear. But we're going to suggest that we will be releasing the trout stocking schedule for the next month on the third week of the month before it. So everybody will be on the same page. It's a real challenge. And we know from our survey data that everybody's split on trout stocking. So we're trying to alleviate some of the strain on our folks and then get rid of some of the equity issues we have with people getting a hold of schedules. The other part of that with the stock trout plan is I propose a 25% reduction in trout stocking for next year. I am really glad that the trout anglers aren't as organized as you all are, because those are going to be some very unpleasant meetings. But those are things that need to be brought out there, and we're talking about how we're going to implement those reductions. It means we're going to stock fewer times, in all likelihood. Now, With that stock trout management plan, we actually don't have to go through the regulatory process on it, but I don't think that's right given the implication it's going to have. So anybody here has an interest in trout fishing, please comment on it. I don't care if your comment is, this is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Where did you come up with this? I want you to comment on it. I want you to weigh in on it, because that's very useful with what changes we may make, or alternatively, cases we make to resolve some of those concerns. Anything that goes through that process will then be presented again to the board in August. It'll get amended, adopted, rejected. They generally get adopted. So that's, again, the pitch to comment on it. If nobody comments on a staff recommendation, it will sail through every single time. I need you all to weigh in, even if you're in opposition to something going through. I bring this up with the Bass Federation's newsletter. They let me write for them, which I appreciate quite a bit. And I always highlight the factor in the regulatory cycle. If you've ever seen a really crazy idea come from a state fish and wildlife agency, it's probably because 5 or 6 people with a strong opinion showed up and lobbied their case. And if there's no opposition to it, right on through. So keep that in mind. You guys have a lot of influence, not only as club members, but as individuals. Any of those that are approved will go into effect on January 1st, 2027. Beyond the reg cycle, there's something that I appreciate the fact that many of you listen to Thomas Ahrens' podcast. I want to express my gratitude to Director Brown for also helping to articulate some of the concerns in the work. He is tirelessly working to solve this. To give you all perspective on Director Brown, he likes to show up in turkey hunting clothes in the spring because the man's a sportsman. He grew up in Virginia. That's what he likes to do. It sounds like I am just heaping praise on him. I am. I really appreciate the work he's doing. And as a sportsman myself, I appreciate the fact that we have a sportsman leading our organization, because I know that he is doing the best he can with it. So when you see him going through the funding issues and those type of things, that's what he's doing. And not all directors are that candid about those issues. So that was huge to get that through. But it gets into our budget. So I run aquatics on about a $9.5 million budget. Chad alluded to it earlier. I am shocked that we have not been getting to the cuts that are visible to this point. I'll tell you why we didn't get to those cuts. Because we have aggressively been cutting other things as we've gone through it. That means staff vacancies are staying open. When I have a position that leaves, it's going to be very difficult for me to refill that position. I'm getting very nervous because I have a really great biologist, a really great regional manager, a really great assistant chief, and a really great admin assistant that are all within the 2-year time frame to retire. I am very nervous about that. We've also done things like cut out research. I've been asked at least 3 times by this group about Virginia Tech's role. Historically, we funded a lot of research at Virginia Tech. 5 years ago, I basically zeroed out research, aside from a couple projects like what you guys saw with Coastal Carolina. Because the way I looked at it is stocking fish was more of our core priority than conducting research. That was an ugly decision for scientists to make. It was a challenging one. We talk about a trout stocking reduction. The trout program runs about $1 million deficit relative to the trout license. The trout license should realistically be about $50 to break even. I think $50 is too much for a trout license. That's just me being real on that one. But the cost to grow a trout has doubled since 2011, which was the last time we had a fishing license increase. And I see a lot of nice trucks out there. Anybody like to go out and buy a truck at 2011 prices? I mean, when was the last time you go to the Toyota dealership and come out in the mid-20s with a fairly nice truck? It ain't gonna happen. That's the situation we're running into. We're trying to run like a business still selling at 2011 prices, and we're paying 2026 prices. And a lot of the things that Director Brown was talking about is, license increases are only something that can be done, but he highlights the fact that there are other funds available that should come to the department and need to be adjusted. And those include things like what we call House Bill 38. House Bill 38 is a tax on outdoor equipment. I know tax is a dirty word, but taxes fund a lot of government services. It's why we have schools. It's why we have roads. It's why when you call the police, they show up. That's what it funds. So with that House Bill 38, that's on outdoor equipment. And that is there so that people who camp, hike, birdwatch, aren't buying fishing tackle or hunting tackle, are contributing to what we do because they benefit a lot from the programs. I am proud as a sportsman that my purchases of ammunition and fishing tackle fund conservation. I think it's a great model. I just want everybody else to pay their fair share as well. And correcting that is a great way for folks to pay their fair share. One of my greatest case studies I like to give, my sister-in-law is very outdoor oriented, but she's a vegetarian. I completely respect why some people might be a vegetarian. I'm not going to get into that realm. She is very concerned about wildlife conservation and habitat. She lives in Georgia. She buys a fishing license. She has no interest in fishing. I'm sure she sees all the fishing equipment I have and wonders where I went wrong in my life. But I explained to her that if she buys a fishing license, we get federal aid in sport fish restoration, which is based off of the taxes that come in on all the fishing equipment you buy. So your $23 fishing license generates more like $32 or $33 for the agency. So as I explained to her, she buys a fishing license, that's more money going to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, that's more money they can put on the ground. Whether she fishes or not is irrelevant because it's the same price as the access pass, except the access pass doesn't get anything on there. And it brings up another point there. One of the biggest challenges we have in Virginia are license exemptions. Now, again, I know that's fairly contentious, and that's more of an issue on the hunting side of things. But, you know, as Director Brown pointed out, there are millions of dollars of excise tax revenue paid by Virginians that should come to Virginia that we are not eligible to receive because the amount of money we receive is based off the number of licensed hunters and anglers. So I completely respect that somebody feels they should not have to buy a hunting license to hunt on their own property, but a $3 hunting license would result in a lot of revenue generation because we'd start to get all that excise tax on ammunition, hunting equipment, and things like that. That's my other pet thing to do. If your spouse is ever concerned about how much ammunition or firearms you're buying, we buy property with it, we put wildlife conservation on the ground, you can fund conservation if you do that. It was just a bonus as I was stocking up this spring to get ready for hunting season. But those are some of the things that could be done. And that's what gets to the what can I do about it? I've been getting a lot of phone calls from that podcast. I really appreciate Thomas getting the word out. He's done a fantastic job with it. I've worked with Thomas in the past. I think he's a great guy, has a great podcast. I don't usually like to endorse private entities, but Thomas's podcast is pretty good. Recommend you listen to it. But I'm getting a lot of folks calling me asking what they can do, and I want to make this pitch here. And, you know, building on, you know, China Chat's disclaimers, if you have an issue with how the money we have is being spent, you come to us. If you have an issue of what money we have available or what resources we have available, you need to get in touch with your elected officials. I can't tell you the number of sportsmen I run into that are perfectly happy to chew me out for 45 minutes on the phone, but are not willing to send an email to their delegate, senator, or governor articulating what their concerns are. And until you raise something as a concern, they don't know it's a concern. And to build on Chad's initial disclaimer, these are not partisan issues. Outdoor recreation is something that you will find people, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Green Party members, Independents. People love outdoor recreation. This is a big deal. You guys have a case. When you were bringing up your case about the economic value of the striped bass angler to the community, you've got tax revenue, you've got people coming in here from out of state spending money, you're supporting restaurants, you're supporting hotels. If you're concerned about what we're able to offer for a fishing opportunity, bring those points up. Because even if somebody doesn't fish themselves, they appreciate what it does for the community. And I'll give you my perspective on dealing with politicians. I get groans on this one all the time, and I'm going to power through this. You have to understand that so much of politics is public posturing. So the thing you see on the forefront of any elected official is oftentimes driven by public posturing. And I go through that because there are an awful lot of politicians that are in this to benefit their community. Public service can be an absolute nightmare, particularly at some of the lower levels. It doesn't pay enough, nobody's happy with what you do, everybody's critical of everything you do. There are a lot of really good people that got into this because they want to benefit their community. So when I work with a delegate who wants us to talk to his Ruritan club out in Western Virginia, he just wants Richmond to pay attention to his community. I respect that because there are a lot of folks like that. You folks need to advocate for things that are relevant to you. Now, what are those specific issues? That's up to you. I don't want to stack the deck on it. I just want to let you know that you all have power with it. And I'm in a situation right now where I'm really limited by resources. I'll do really great work with it with my folks if I get more, but these are the folks you need to talk to, and you need to let them know that this stuff is important to you, because I think you'll be impressed. And within that disclaimer about looking for the community, remember to be respectful and remember to reflect the fact that even if you may not have voted for that person, they may be looking out for your community. I have worked with elected officials that after working with them, I would vote for them and I would not necessarily have, and vice versa. So keep that in mind. You might really be surprised. So that's kind of my pitch on how to get involved with it. I mean, you can approach us on different issues, but your elected officials need to hear about it. They need to understand how important this stuff is to you, even if it just gets sport fishing on their radar, because there are a lot of people that don't fish, and you need to get that point out there. And that's kind of my pitch. I'm open for more discussion on it. You, sir.
Do you get revenue from, say, like boat registrations?
Yes, we do. We don't necessarily get all of it, which is another problem. We really need to get our fair share of that one because that is a big revenue source. But again, it's also challenging because looking at those fees, I highlight what my personal property tax bill is. I pay a lot more to my county than I do to the state game department. And whether that's right or wrong is a discussion off the mic, but it's a statement of fact. And any of you that have a boat that's in good condition are going to find that same situation. We don't get that much revenue off of the boat registrations.
Who gets it?
We get the revenue, it's just not that much.
But who gets the rest of it?
A lot of it is at the discretion of the General Assembly. So it can go in other directions. And that's why I think it's important to weigh in about where you think that those funds should go. Yes, sir.
Following on that, lots of revenue from the federal government on Pittman Robertson, which is game and game habitat primarily.
I like you the more you talk.
Nickel Johnson does the same sort of thing on the fish side.
Yes, sir.
I know Pittman Robertson has a requirement at the federal level that if the state does things to basically steal that money away from its intended purpose, they don't get the money.
Did you talk to John Odenkirk this afternoon? Because I had this one on a fish-related issue. So the way
A couple more statements of my surroundings here, and then maybe some questions. My recollection is that quite some years ago, don't even know what party was in control of the legislature, but the General Assembly started dipping into the fish and game funds, put it in the general budget. Is that continuing today? And that includes license fees and maybe boat registrations, things that were historically available to fish and game.
license fees are going directly to the department. So the license fee is not going anywhere but to us. And with the federal match that's on it, there are very serious consequences for misspending those funds. There's a lot of conflict that comes up about what we will not allow on our public fishing lakes that people think is reasonable, but it conflicts with their purpose. So that's very solid. The other stuff, like the House Bill 38 and some of the watercraft sales and use tax, that's where it gets a little squishier in what you're alluding to. And I think it's critically important that if you're concerned about that money going to the department, you raise that concern. Similarly, realize that a lot of those numbers were based off of things that are well out of date with inflation and increasing costs. We could realistically get out of this with no change to our license fees just by correcting that revenue stream. I mean, I would love to see a situation where we reduce license fees. I mean, I can't offer that without cutting a lot more, but it would really help make us whole. John.
So like a couple things. One, for everybody's benefit, we will be putting together a little bit of a next steps action plan in terms of the advice that we've heard today, both from this meeting and from our prior one, and we'll be sharing that with all you guys. So I just want to assure you that we definitely plan to follow up on this and find a way to support the idea that DWR needs to be better funded, and we're going to help accomplish that. So that's the number one point. Number two, we're getting a little bit long in the time, so we need to kind of wrap things up. But most importantly, number three, let's all thank Dr. Mike for coming here today. You're doing a great job.